And welcome to another edition of Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. We are overjoyed. We are humbled. We bow in the direction of Mike Hogan, who has finally made it to an episode of Krown Gridiron Nation this year because they're first place in the Eastern Division and on their way to the playoffs. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, it is, and I don't want to associate with you small fry anymore.
Okay, well, you're going to have to. You've got one loss in the column for the Argos. This might be your second loss. And we've got Gord Randall in Vancouver. Thanks for being here, Gord. Time now for our 2-minute offense. Number 7, Penn State hosting Delaware. What do you think happened there? It was a walk for Penn State. Teo Johnson had a light day of work at tight end, 2 catches for 14 yards. New Hampshire edged out by Central Michigan in overtime on a game-winning field goal, though Joey Corcoran for New Hampshire had a good day, 3 catches for 30 yards. Fillion chipped in with 2 catches for 19. UNLV and Mississauga native Jet Elad got a workout at corner against number 2 ranked Michigan. 6 tackles for the transfer out of Ohio. Defensive lineman Akeem Messidor had a big day for Miami. The team had a bigger one with a win over Texas A&M, who are ranked 23rd coming in. Another breeze for the Syracuse Orange early on this season. Damian Alford got some reps in, got a catch, got 15 yards. A bit of a slow start for Curtis Rourke in his first complete game of the year, 18 of 29 for 203. He did serve up a couple of picks, but they got the win by 7 over Florida Atlantic. Daniel Opoku had a fine stat line, a good day for the senior from Saskatoon. Not a great day for his San Diego State Aztecs against UCLA. North Dakota piled it on against Northern Arizona. Ethan Ball with 2 tackles. Quincy Vaughn, we're going to be talking about him a little later. He knows how to find the promised land. Lethbridge native Tanner McLaughlin with 4 catches for 47 yards for Arizona as they lose to Mississippi State in OT by a major. In a battle of the great Canadian linebackers, it was Memphis on the right side of the scoreboard, but the stat line tilted towards Malik Straker's way with 8 tackles. Jeffrey Kenton Arku of Memphis with 3. Rutgers dominates Temple 36-7. Wesley Bailey coming off an injury from last game. He was back at it. 1 tackle and a pass breakup. So how much of a relief was it to finally see Curtis Rourke in a whole game, not only as a football fan, but as a Canadian football fan, Mike?
Yeah, when that hit happened, I think everybody in this country and, Ohio Bobcat fans certainly held their breath and feared the worst. And to see him miss the one game and come back, I mean, it's great news. And, guys like him and his brother and Trey Ford have been so important for the development of quarterbacks because they can see a light at the end of the tunnel, whether it be playing at the pro level or even playing D1 football at that position. That was just a major sigh of relief. And, the kid's in a tough enough position playing in his brother's spotlight or his shadow because it was a pretty long one because Nathan was so good there. And he's maybe exceeded everybody's expectations. He's a hell of a football player. And just that collective sigh across the country, I think, was huge for a lot of different reasons.
For sure. It was nice to see him back. He had a pretty modest output, throwing a couple interceptions as Ohio barely squeaked out a victory over what I thought was a lesser opponent. So he's definitely going to need to work to find his form again. That's why part of the reason why that injury was so devastating is just that the timing is really, really difficult, right? The first half of the first game of the season, you've been practicing all year to get to that point, your first real live action, and then you can't even get through half it all. It all gets shut down, back down to pretty much 0. And so he's going to have to play catch up a little bit over these next couple weeks. Fortunately, it didn't cost them this week. They were still able to get away with the victory. But he's definitely going to have to sharpen up because there was some pretty obvious rust in keeping an eye on him this past weekend.
But when it came to Canadians on the offensive side of the ball, he was probably the leader this week. But so far, it's the defensive side of the ball that has really been the place for Canadians to shine. For me, it was Akeem Messidor with Miami. Big upset win over Tamu in that game. They came in ranked 22nd, I think, in that game, and Miami unranked. And with 3 tackles and a sack, Messidor living up to his billing. Who do you have on the defensive side of the ball, Gord?
Yeah, I would like to talk about Messidor a little bit, and I did mention him on last week's program as well. But this is a guy who's coming off of 7.5 season, a 10.5 sack season, a 10.5 sack season the year before when he was still at West Virginia. This is a guy that has proven he can consistently get after the passer. And what bodes really well is that big win by the Hurricanes puts them right back into the national spotlight. And we hear the phrase post-hype sleeper used a lot about young players, whether it be in a fantasy or a real-life context, a lot. It feels like the Miami Hurricanes team might be a little bit of a post-hype sleeper this year. Mario Cristobal comes in last year, and they were one of the trendy teams. Tyler Van Dyke looked like he was trending towards a top 5 pick, and then the wheels kind of fell off a little bit. They didn't live up to that. Feels like people maybe overlooked them this year, but that early win has them right back square on the map, which means we'll be seeing a lot of Akeem Messidor this year. If he can keep that production up, NFL is very much in his future.
And we'll go to Arkansas State of all places and talk a little bit about Malik Straker, the transfer from Carleton. He's been a tackling machine so far on a team that isn't very good, but if you look at his name and the numbers nationally, he's going to be among the league leaders and NCAA leaders. He's been on the field a lot, but he's making the tackles when he gets the opportunity, so there's that.
And we've mentioned 3 Canadian players that could be in, guess what it's called? Our stateside 5. In at number 5, it is Quincy Vaughn, the former quarterback, now turned tight end, had 6 touches of the ball, and 2 of those turned into TDs, and 1 of them were game-winning points. Daniel Apoko out of Saskatoon for San Diego State against UCLA. 3 tackles, a sack, and a TFL in a losing effort. A big upset over Texas A&M for Miami's Akeem Messidor. 3 tackles, a TFL, and a sack. Nolan Ulm and Eastern Washington came up just short against Fresno State, but Ulm was a top producer, 4 catches for 50 yards. And the MAC Player of the Year is back. Curtis Rourke at quarterback for your Ohio Bobcats. 203 yards passing, a TD, and 29 yards rushing. Everyone that follows college football has followed the saga of the Pac-12, which is now the 2-pack. And our sympathies go out to everyone at Oregon State and Washington State. But man, WASU, a win over Wisconsin in the Inland Empire. Let's go to the fan reaction and the coach reaction to take you to break.
And then others coming on board, and he's downstairs with Quinn. Look at that scene.
They missed you with the Gatorade. They missed you. What emotions are you dealing with right now?
I'm just so proud of our team. They stood in there, and we could have quit, and it wasn't getting easy, and we gutted it out, and we pulled off a big win.
Welcome back, everyone. Time to roll across the country for U Sports in our 3-minute warning. Notch another win in the battle for the wheat belt between Regina and Saskatchewan 2. The Saskatchewan Huskies. Rhett Vavra had a day. Man, he had a career today. 6 receptions, 130 in terms of yards, 3 in terms of touchdowns. Anton Amandrud with 391 yards passing and 4 TDs through the air. Great crowd in Saskatoon. 10,054. Taylor Elgersma tied a school record with 6 touchdown passes in a game. 2 of them went to Raiden Thorne. 2 of them went to Ethan Jordan. What a day for Laurier as they embarrassed Guelph. Well, after 3 weeks, the Windsor Lancers look like they're for real going into Waterloo and blanking the home side. Danny Skelton, 391 yards passing and a TD. Javoni, he's no jabroni. Javoni Cunningham, that is. 178 all-purpose yards and a 53-yard punt return touchdown. Jared Chasidi with 17 carries. What a workhorse. 173 yards and 2 TDs. He led the Tricolor to a win in Toronto. Toronto only going 8 of 22 passing. The UBC Thunderbirds totally dominating the visiting Calgary Dinos. Things bad in Cowtown. Things are good, though, for Garrett Rooker. 25 of 30 for 351 and 3 TDs. He loves all of his receivers. 10 of them had multiple receptions. This was one of our games of the week. Carleton led this one at the half, 14-10. Thanks in part to Cassim Ferdinand with an unexpected TD pass to Ben Huckabone. But hey, wait a minute. Western got their act together in the third. They took control. Evan Hellock throwing for 254 and 3 TDs. 2 of them to Seth Robertson to close out the third and then open up the fourth. And that iced it for those purple ponies. In Quebec, Rouge is better than red, and the Rouge et Or showed us why. Antoine Robichaud threw for 322 and a pair of TDs. One to Isaac Gallarditz, who led all, receiving with 106 yards in front of 13,340 at Stade Telus. You want to see a game with no offensive touchdowns? Well, I got one for you. St. Mary's in Acadia. Here's Trent Price with an 11-yard fumble return for a TD. Kyle Chappis for Acadia had 3 sacks and 4 TFL. Okay, guys, it's time for our U Sports grab bag because there's lots of issues out there. You've got Western that looks kind of mortal. They were tied at halftime last week, and just this past weekend, they were behind in a game at halftime. There's Windsor sitting at 3-0. In Canada West, you've got haves and have-nots. In Quebec, you got all these fun quarterbacks in one place. And in Atlantic Canada, offenses can't seem to find the end zone. Gord, I'm going to go to you first. What do you grab out of the U Sports grab bag?
Well, I'll stay on brand and hang out west here where I live. And we'll take a look at a couple of teams that have caught my eye, one for the good reasons and one for maybe not the good reasons. And those are the 2 Alberta teams. With regards to University of Alberta, the northern version, I'm wondering if it's time to start taking these guys seriously. You know, in previewing the Canada West this year, it felt like it was maybe a 2-horse race between Saskatchewan and UBC, with Manitoba, Regina, Alberta all kind of hovering around the fringes, maybe able to make some noise. Well, of those 3 teams, it's pretty clear that Alberta is the one to pay attention to, and they get a chance to test their mettle. They go into Saskatoon on Friday to take on the Huskies, and that'll be a real early statement game for both teams. Saskatchewan has kind of blown the doors off their opponents so far this year. Alberta has quite comfortably beat both their opponents so far this year as well. So if they can play the Huskies tight in their own den, I think it bodes really well for the rematch later this season and for Alberta's chances. And if you look at this Alberta roster, you know, Chris Morris has recruited very, very well over the last number of years, and it never has quite translated to the on-field success. It's been a real slow build in that program, but they may have finally turned that corner completely. And the big difference for them, they've always been able to put up points. But in the last year or two, we have started to see a development where they are playing better defense more consistently. And that has been a trend this year. They've allowed under 20 points in both of their 2 games. That's a big step forward for them on that side of the ball. And they still have the offensive talents like Eli Hetlander and Jonathan Rosary leading the charge on the offensive side of the ball. On the flip side, you head down south, and Calgary has looked way off so far this season, like not close. Alberta holds them to 171 total offensive yards and 3 turnovers. And then at UBC, 311 total offensive yards, though 85 of those were on 1 coverage bust that turned into a long touchdown, and another 2 turnovers as they get blown out by UBC. So they have a lot of work to do in Calgary, and it's frankly been a little bit of a stunning fall for a program that was one of the national powerhouses for a decade to this last 2 years, where it has been arguably the worst team in the Canada West the last 2 years.
It's interesting, being in Ontario and taking a look at what's going on out west, and you think of the traditional powers out there, and to see Calgary and Manitoba and Regina at a combined 0-6 is kind of shocking. And then seeing the numbers, and historically Alberta's just churned out great offensive linemen, and then Steady Eddie wins the Crichton a few years ago, running behind them. So it's great to see it, because Chris Morris is a hell of a coach, and I like seeing a little bit of change, because in Ontario, it's been the Western machine for the last half decade. So, maybe there is a team here, and maybe that team is Windsor, and they're off to a great start so far this year. They blew out Guelph, they blew out Waterloo, and had almost 700 yards in offense last week. And when the Cercelli family took over, JP as head coach, and Joe and Mike, who've had great success, they brought that success from Western. They see how it's done with not only the Mustangs, but the junior Mustangs, with the high school powerhouse that they were in London. They know how to win, and they've been able to recruit. They've been able to keep some really star players from the Windsor area at home, and they've got size and nasty on both sides of the ball. So I'm really curious to see if this is the team that can maybe join Queens and Laurier as the teams that are going to be considered maybe the team that can knock Western off this year. They're still at the top of the perch, but hopefully it gets a little bit more interesting.
The date that I want to circle on the calendar right now is September the 30th, because that's when Western takes on Windsor. And that will be an interesting test to see just how real Windsor is, and just what Western's been struggling with here in the first couple of weeks of the season, to see if that's real or if they can put that in their rear view mirror.
And I feel like that's the more interesting conversation to have about the OUA these days, is not so much about Western and if somebody's ready to take down Western yet or whatever. Like, let's save that conversation for late October, November, when it actually matters. At this point in time, I think what's far more interesting is figuring out who that second tier of contenders is going to be to potentially take them down. I wouldn't read too much into this Carleton effort, and that's not to take credit away from Carleton. A very good effort all around for them. But Western has historically kind of struggled with Carleton. And so I wouldn't necessarily make any sweeping conclusions about Western from that. But you're right. I think this second tier, I think we have to consider Windsor right in the middle of it. And Laurier has worked their way into it as well, with Queens kind of being the holdover as the runner-up from last year, returning a pretty solid roster as well. So, the games between those three, we've already seen Laurier play Queens and beat them in Kingston in a tight one opening weekend. But the games between those three, I think, are going to be the ones to mark on the OUA calendar for the remainder of the regular season, because that, to me, appears to be the tier of serious contenders, non-Western division.
I also want to add Ottawa in there too when Ben Miracle gets back, because that's a team that I think can score a lot of points with the other teams in the OUA.
Coming up, we're going to talk about high school football and all other kinds of amateur football as well. Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who don't know, I happen to be the president of Football Canada as well, and the general secretary of IFAF, which is the world governing body of football. We haven't talked much about football outside of the college realm on this show, but I really want to talk about amateur football. And it occurred to me that there's Mike that can talk about the role the CFL plays in this country, at least the CFL teams play in this country. Gord has gone through a process where he started a high school program a few years ago and is going through various growing pains and is trying to build on to that program. I can tell you from the Football Canada perspective, things are going well because our numbers are being driven by flag football and getting kids in at a younger age. And our numbers are now matching those of 2016. So while we went through a long-term decline, we're back up again and building on those numbers. And I think there is a lot of hope in the not too distant future that there will be an announcement that's positive about getting flag football into the Olympics for LA 28. And we're just holding on that one. And there's a little red dot on my chest here because if I say too much more, I think the IOC will take me out from a tower somewhere. But Mike, tell me about what the CFL is doing in terms of the teams, because I saw what the Winnipeg Blue Bombers did in terms of reconditioned helmets, 530 reconditioned helmets for high schools in the Winnipeg area. Teams are doing that team by team, aren't they?
Yeah, and I obviously give the big thumbs up to the Bombers and every other team around the CFL that's been doing things like this and usually not getting a whole lot of pats on the back for it. I know here in Toronto last week, we announced we were going to commit $200,000 to minor football over the next 2 years to Toronto Flag Football League. And we renewed a partnership that we're really proud of with TFFL, to Football Ontario, to Football Toronto. That's where the money's going. And from a CFL perspective, we know that we have to invigorate the young fans across the country. It's been discussed for a long time that the age of the CFL fan is a little older than that of the NFL fan. And we've really tried to make strides in that community. If you had have gone to our game this week against Montreal, you would have seen a ton of minor football players in the game. I spoke to a group from TFFL before the game. They're really getting into it. And, even anecdotally, if you went to a game pre-COVID and went to that game against the Alouettes, you would have seen a giant difference in the ages of the people in the stands. We know we have to get younger, and we know that we have to educate young kids about the sport of football. Not only tackle football, but touch football. There are some kids who don't want to play tackle football. There are some parents that don't want to, get those risks in as well. Touch football or flag football are unbelievable options to learn the game and to play the game. And if this Olympic announcement comes through, like we all hope it does, that's nothing but great things ahead for kids who want to play the sport, but who maybe are a little intimidated by the contact nature of the sport.
So, Gord, what about being on the ground on the tackle side at the high school level where a football coach has to do more than just coach? How has it been coming off the back end of the pandemic and essentially trying to rebuild a program?
Well, participation rates have held pretty steady. It's still cyclical. So at our school right now, for example, we're feeling pretty good about our numbers at the senior grades, though we're pretty thin at the junior grades and have some work to do there. But nothing that it would have been anomalous before the pandemic broke out. So, I was actually just talking to a local reporter at our game last Friday who was asking on that exact subject. And I said to him, I said, no, I think we've held fairly steady. And one thing that hasn't really changed is kids want to get out and do things, right? They want to be active. They want to connect with other kids. They want something to care about. Those things have not changed. So, there's still battles that you fight with, families that really think the game's not safe for their kid or don't think that they have the time to commit, or other sports. If we're being honest with the professionalization of so many kids' sports these days, that is a huge, huge challenge. The demands that are being put on these kids, which frankly is completely unfair, and I wish we would do something about. But where I have really noticed the difference coming out of the pandemic, though, and has been a real struggle, is getting help with the volunteers that support the program, whether it's parents to help with off-field duties, whether it's coaches to help with on-field duties. It has been more of a struggle than ever to find people because we rely so much on volunteerism. One of the things that people did during the pandemic was they kind of circled the wagons, and the pandemic forced people to trim the extras out of their life. And then coming out of the pandemic, there were a lot of people who just kind of got used to that and said, you know what, I actually kind of like this, whatever, however you want to frame it, spending more time with my family or what have you, right? I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of youth sports are pivoting towards paid coaching, supporting these kids rather than volunteerism, because it's a way to deal with this particular trend. And in football, where ideally you probably have at least 8 coaches on your staff, it is challenging to find enough people to make that work. I've been fortunate this year to have a few new people pop in, but then on the support side with administration, the school, with parents, those types of things, that's still a battle, and I think more of a battle than it was in years past. So that's been the biggest, most noticeable difference for me and the biggest challenge I've had to face in this kind of new world that we are living in post-pandemic.
GOW means Games of the Week, and it's coming up around the bend. And welcome back, everyone. Time for Games of the Week. What do you got for me, Gord?
Well, my eyes are on one of the other very trendy teams this early season, Florida State, as they take on Boston College. And for Canadians, from Canadian eyes, Boston College is the team to watch here. Now, they haven't had the strongest of starts so far, squeaked out a victory to be 1-1 going into this game. So the point spread is probably going to be at least 20 points in favor of Florida State. But what's most interesting for Canadian football fans is the entire left side of the starting offensive line for Boston College, at least to this point, has been Canadian. It's been Logan Taylor at left tackle and Kyle Hergel at left guard, who's a name that you've probably heard since it feels like he's been in the NCAA forever. But the two of them have been starting beside each other on the offensive line. And it just so happens on the other side of the ball is a guy who is right now probably the odds-on favorite to be the top pass rusher selected in the NFL draft next spring, and that's Jared Verse. Now, Verse is a really interesting story. He started at UAlbany, which is a backwater by college football standards, transfers to Florida State, comes out of nowhere, and immediately becomes a superstar playing for Florida State. He's got power, he's got quickness, he bends the edge better than anybody else. So Taylor in particular is going to have his hands full, but his buddy Kyle Hergel right beside him will be a big part of that success as well. So I'm looking forward to that particular one-on-two matchup in watching this particular game.
I'm going to focus on a team. I'm going to say something that's going to sound really strange, and if I had said it 2 years ago, you would have fallen over in your chair. The coolest team to watch in the NCAA is Colorado. Think about that there goes Mullin now. It's fun. I mean, you know, they played TCU, the top 20 team, and lit it up on them. And then they trounced Nebraska, which is a rivalry game for them. They've got Colorado State this week. Colorado State stinks. Doesn't matter, because if you watch Colorado, they're going to be fun. And when we all started watching football when we were 1 year old, we watched because it was fun. And Deion Sanders and his son Shedeur have made it fun again. They ran that little, you know, sort of fake toss reverse for a touchdown last week. It's fun. And there are a lot of people who hate Deion Sanders. And there are a lot of people who love Deion Sanders and what he's done in that program or for that program. And you know what? Every great movie has a great hero and a great villain. And no matter where you fall on the Deion Sanders depth chart in terms of, you know, hero to villain, I think this is just such a great story. I don't care if they win or lose by 50. They're going to be fun to watch.
For everyone here on Krown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullin saying, get off the couch, let's get out to the game.